This is the Obed Boundary GRX 810, and it might just be the most fun per dollar I've had on a gravel bike in a while. That, combined with Obed's unique sales model that makes it easy to get pretty much your perfect bike straight out of the box, makes this thing a pretty alluring option for riders looking to stretch their budget. That's not to say that there aren't any flaws, and there are some relatively outdated standards that you'll have to work around should you choose to pick one up. So let's dive into the Boundary and help you decide if it should be your next gravel bike. Obed isn't exactly a household name, and I actually hadn't heard of them until they reached out to us to see if we wanted to review their adventure-oriented gravel bike, the Boundary. And as it turns out, Obed exists underneath the American Bicycle Group as an affordable sister brand to the titanium juggernauts Lightspeed and triathlon gurus Quintana Roo. Obed takes advantage of their smaller scale operation by using something called just-in-time assembly. In other words, they wait to build up and even paint their bikes until they're ordered. And this frees up valuable resources on their end, and more importantly for us, the consumer, gives us tons of customization options that we can make when ordering a bike. For example, when ordering a Boundary GRX 810 like we reviewed, you can choose to upgrade a number of components, including wheels, bars, tires, etc., as well as stem length, bar width, crank length, and of course, paint and decal color. Obviously, some folks would rather go through this process on their own or through a local bike shop, but for those of you who are looking to save yourself the hassle from upgrading or swapping out components down the road, this is a pretty appealing option. Speaking of appealing, Obed, like a lot of other direct-to-consumer companies, has the shipping process down pat. My bike arrived unscathed after being shipped across the country and took me maybe all of 10 minutes to unbox it, install the front wheel, seat posts, my personal pedals, and I was good to go. Notice that I didn't say convert the bike to tubeless, and that's something that I usually have to do even when reviewing other bikes from direct-to-consumer companies. And that's because the Boundary came with valves and sealant already installed. A huge perk that again wouldn't be possible without their just-in-time assembly and shipping process. But that's enough about shipping, let's move on to the bike. The Boundary GRX 810 is their base level gravel bike, which is on sale right now for just $1,995, which is a straight up steal. We'll talk more about what components you'll get for that price in a moment. The Boundary's carbon frame and fork are dimpled with a slew of mounting points and are both fender compatible. Speaking of compatibility, it's great to see that the Boundary does have internal cable routing for both a front derailleur and or a dropper seat post. So if you wanted to add one of those on, you could definitely do that. Another nice touch is the abrasion-resistant coating on the drive side chainstay and around the bottom bracket, which doesn't necessarily do anything to silence chain noise, but will certainly help prevent damage from debris while riding. But it obviously can't be all good news, especially with a bike that's as affordable as this guy is. Earlier I mentioned that there are some things that felt just a bit outdated, and one of those is that this bike does use a proprietary derailleur hanger, so there's going to be no SRAM T-type builds going on. Another thing that I would have liked to see different is the tire clearance. The Boundary only has clearance for up to 45 centimeters. There's endurance road bikes with clearance like that, and for an adventure-oriented bike like the Boundary, I think a set of 53C knobbies wouldn't be out of place. Another place where the Boundary felt just a little bit behind the times was the geometry, which is highlighted by a pretty short reach and long seat tube. I'm 6'1" and usually ride a size large or 58 centimeter bike, but with the Boundary, I did opt for an extra large. This gave me a 394 millimeter reach, which paired with the 73-degree seat tube angle, put me in a pretty comfortable position, both in and out of the saddle. If you're looking to get a Boundary for yourself, then it wouldn't be a bad idea to head over to our website, 99spokes.com, and throw it into our comparison tool. There you can compare it against hundreds, maybe thousands of other gravel bikes, and you can see specifically how that geometry compares to your current bike or other gravel bikes you've been riding. That's actually what I used to figure out that I should get an XL. I essentially just compared that geo to my personal bike and went with what was going to feel the closest. So that being said, if you are on the taller side of the spectrum, much taller than me, you might find yourself sizing out of that upper size limit pretty quickly. And on the flip side, if you're shorter or have shorter legs, you might not be a huge fan of the longer seat tube and the reduced standover clearance that comes with it. Now, the rest of the geometry was pretty much what you'd expect. It has a 72-degree head tube angle and 435 millimeter chainstays. Another interesting talking point is that Obed will sell you the Boundary with either 650B or 700C wheels, all with that exact same frame set. Now, the numbers that I've been stating here are with the 700C wheels, which is what I've been testing. But for those of you who want to get a little crazy and throw some 650Ps on your XL, then Obed will leave you room for that experimentation. While riding, my sized up Boundary felt pretty natural and easy to get along with. I have relatively long legs, so the longer seat tube wasn't a huge issue, and the combination of a relatively slack head tube angle and long-ish chainstays made the bike plenty predictable on rougher roads and single-track trails. I also found the frameset to be on the more compliant side, taking the edge off of roots, rocks, and washboard roads. Now though, let's move on and talk about the part spec, starting with the group set. And as the name would imply, you are going to get Shimano's GRX 810 drivetrain and brakes, the latter of which performed flawlessly. They had plenty of power, even with single finger braking from the hoods. As for the drivetrain, I opted to go with the 1x setup, which comes with a relatively narrow 11-speed, 11 to 40 tooth cassette in the back. I'm usually a big fan of 1x setups on gravel bikes, but this was the first time I'd ridden one without the assistance of a few more climbing gears, and I definitely noticed it. The 40 tooth chainring made for a pretty steep lower end, which was especially noticeable while riding single track. I didn't do any high-speed road riding while I had the Boundary, but I'd imagine that you'd find the drivetrain's limitations there pretty quickly as well. And that kind of leaves you with a tough decision. Do you go with the 1x bike like I reviewed and just plan on investing some money to get a wider range cassette and derailleur down the road? Or do you go with the 2x option and get all the gearing that you need, albeit with a bit of extra complication and weight that comes with a front derailleur? Regardless though, it's hard to complain too much for a price under $2,000. And speaking of not complaining, the shifts on that GRX 810 were super smooth, and as long as I wasn't going up any super steep gradients, the drivetrain basically faded in the background and I was left to enjoy the ride. I think that's what we're all looking for when it comes to the group set on our bikes. Like I mentioned earlier, you have the option to customize or upgrade just about everything when purchasing the bike, one of those being the wheels and tires. I went ahead and opted for the standard Sunringle Duroc 30 comp wheels wrapped in 43C Panaracer Gravel King SS tires. Unsurprisingly, these tires were very fast rolling, which is especially apparent on my short paved jaunts between my house and the nearest fire road. What did surprise me though was how much grip they managed to provide off-road. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a semi-slick, but gave me more confidence than I expected, even on dusty single track. In terms of touch points, my bike came with the ever agreeable WTB Volt saddle, and like I mentioned before, your choice in terms of stem length and bar width. Speaking of bars, that was the one thing that I didn't exactly get along with, at least in terms of components. The FSA A-Wing AGX Pros featured a pretty aggressive forward sweep. This is fine when resting my wrists on the flats of the bars, but trying to grip them left me in a pretty awkward, unergonomic position. That said, their flat profile did a good job of damping vibration and impacts and likely contributed to the comfortable ride feel I mentioned earlier. Collectively, my Boundary GRX tipped the scales at 23.6 pounds or 10.7 kilograms. So it's by no means a featherweight, but I think a lot of this weight did come from the more mid-tier components, and I've seen bikes build up with this exact same frame set for under 20 pounds or 9 kilograms. In summary, the Obed Boundary GRX 810 is one of the few carbon gravel bikes that you can get for less than $2,000. And it does so while still retaining a pretty respectable and reliable set of components. If you're on the market for a new gravel bike and you prioritize a lightweight and compliant frame set, or just the ability to customize your bike straight off the get-go, and of course you can work around Obed's kind of awkward sizing, then I really think it could be a solid option. A few other bikes that fit the bill around the same price tag are the all-new Giant Revolt 3, which gets in-frame storage and adjustable geometry, but with a bit lower tier components. Another one is the Canyon Grizzle 7, which swaps the carbon frame out for aluminum, but gets slightly higher tier components and wider tire clearance. If you have any more questions about the Boundary, any of those three bikes, or really any gravel bike period, then you can go ahead and leave those down there in the comments. Don't forget as well, if you're on the market for a new bike, to go ahead and check out 99spokes.com, where you can compare all of your favorites side by side, and I've got a link for that down in the description. Now, while you're down there, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the 99 Spokes YouTube channel. And lastly, remember that bikes are for everyone. Have fun out there.